The mountains held their breath. They were giants of rock and pine, unforgiving in the deep heart of winter. But even in the harshest places, miracles could find a way. They could arrive wrapped in fur, with desperate eyes, asking for a kindness the wild could not offer. Leo Vance believed he knew these woods. He thought he understood their silence and their secrets. Then came the night of the great storm. The snow fell in a thick, blinding curtain. The wilderness brought something to his door. It was a visitor no map or guidebook could ever explain. A knock on the door in a blizzard is strange. It is even stranger when the visitor is not human. What do you do when the wild asks for shelter? This is a story of trust. It is a story of survival. It is about a connection that crosses the line between man and beast. Leo Vance stood at his kitchen window. He watched the fat, heavy snowflakes swirl in the yellow light of his porch lamp. The Weather Channel had called for the worst storm in 50 years. For once, they were not wrong. The wind was a hungry animal, howling through the tall pine trees that surrounded his small cabin. It carried a deep Arctic cold that seemed to seep through the log walls themselves. Leo was 60 years old. He had lived most of his life in these mountains. He was a wildlife photographer. Sometimes he helped the local conservation office. His wife, Clara, had died 5 years ago. Since then, he found comfort in the quiet. He found it in the steady presence of nature and in his camera, which captured the lives of the wild things that called this forest home. The thermometer on his window read -20 degrees. It was still dropping. Leo pulled his old flannel robe tighter around him. He added another log to the fire. The flames leapt and crackled in the stone fireplace. They threw dancing shadows across the living room. The room was filled with Clara's warm, simple furniture. His own photographs covered the walls. There were pictures of elk in the morning mist, of a bald eagle in flight, of a bear cub tumbling in a field of wildflowers. A sound cut through the howl of the wind. It was different. Leo paused, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. He listened. There it was again, a soft thump against his front door. It was followed by a strange sound, something between a chirp and a mew. Leo set down his mug. He walked to the door, his steps slow and cautious. In all his years here, he had learned that wildlife stayed away from human homes, especially during storms. They had their own dens, their own ancient ways of surviving the brutal Montana winters. Whatever was at his door must be in terrible trouble. The thumping came again. It was more urgent this time. Leo reached for the heavy oak walking stick he kept by the door. Clara had always teased him about it. He turned the deadbolt. He pulled the handle. The wind tore at the door, trying to rip it from his hand. But what he saw in the circle of porch light made him forget the cold. A bobcat stood on his welcome mat. Snow clung to her tawny spotted fur. But she was not alone. And she was not just any bobcat. She was clearly pregnant. Her belly was swollen and round beneath her thick winter coat. Huddled behind her, pressed against her legs for warmth, were two small cubs. They were no more than a few months old. Their own spotted fur was wet and matted with snow. They shivered so hard their whole bodies shook. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He had photographed hundreds of animals. He had spent thousands of hours in the woods. He had never seen anything like this. Bobcats were shy. They were ghosts of the forest. They avoided humans at all costs. Yet here was a mother staring up at him. Her golden eyes were filled with a plea that felt almost human. She made that strange chirping sound again. One of her cubs let out a pitiful mew. Every instinct told him to close the door. Every wildlife manual he had ever read screamed it. Wild animals were dangerous. They were unpredictable. A mother with her young was the most dangerous of all. But he could not move. Something in those golden eyes held him fast. The bobcat did not growl. She did not raise her fur or show her teeth. She simply stood there, her body curved like a shield around her cubs. She waited. "I must be losing my mind," he muttered to the wind. He thought of his friends at the conservation office. They would call him a fool. He took a slow step back, leaving the door open. It was an invitation. "All right," he said, his voice soft. "Come on in then, but this is just until the storm passes. Understand?" The mother bobcat hesitated for only a second. Then she padded silently into his home. Her paws left wet prints on the hardwood floor. Her cubs stumbled after her, their eyes wide. Leo pushed the door shut against the raging storm. The silence of the cabin settled around them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The small family did not hesitate. They walked directly to the fireplace. The two cubs collapsed onto the warm hearth rug. It was Clara's favorite rug, a soft braided oval. Leo felt a strange mix of worry and warmth. Their mother remained standing. Her eyes never left Leo. Now that she was out of the snow, he could see her more clearly. She was smaller than he expected, probably not more than 30 pounds, even with her pregnancy. Her beautiful fur was matted in places. He noticed she had a slight limp in her right front paw. "You've had a rough time, haven't you, girl?" he murmured. He kept his voice low and steady. He did not want to frighten her. The bobcat's tufted ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but she showed no fear. She seemed to relax, just a little, as her cubs began to thaw. Their violent shivering slowly stopped. They curled into tight balls of fur on the rug. Leo's photographer's eye saw the perfect picture they made. The mother's protective stance, the cubs curled like apostrophes, the firelight glowing on their spotted coats. His camera was in his study, just down the hall, but he didn't dare move. The moment felt too sacred. It was a fragile truce he did not want to break. Instead, he slowly lowered himself into his favorite armchair. He kept a respectful distance. The mother bobcat watched him for a few more minutes. Finally, she seemed to decide he was not a threat. She lay down beside her cubs, but she did not sleep. She remained alert, her ears turning to catch every sound in the quiet house. "I need to call you something," Leo said softly, more to himself than to the cat. "I can't just call you Mother Bobcat in my head." He studied her as she began to clean one of her cubs. Her tongue was rough, and her movements were precise and gentle, even though she must be exhausted. "Clara," he decided. A lump formed in his throat. His Clara would have loved this. She would have been thrilled. She would have probably had them all purring and eating from her hand by now. The bobcat, his Clara, looked up at him when he spoke the name. It was as if she understood. Then she went back to her grooming. The cubs were already fast asleep. Their tiny sides rose and fell in a peaceful rhythm. Leo noticed details about them now. One cub had a bolder, more curious face. The other seemed shyer, staying closer to his mother. "You, Scamp," he named the adventurous one. "And Shadow for you," he whispered to the other. "Welcome to my home. God only knows what I'm going to do when this storm is over." As if in answer, the wind howled louder. It rattled the window panes. The Bobcat family pressed closer together. Leo sighed and sank deeper into his chair. He had a feeling it was going to be a very long night. The next morning, the world was silent and white. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape buried in snow. Leo had fallen asleep in his chair. When he opened his eyes, he half expected the living room to be empty. He thought maybe the whole thing had been a strange, vivid dream. But it was real. Clara and her cubs were still there, curled by the glowing embers in the fireplace. The mother bobcat was awake. She was watching him with those same intelligent golden eyes. The cubs, Scamp and Shadow, were beginning to stir. They made small squeaking noises as they stretched their little legs. In the clear morning light, Leo could see how thin they all were. Clara's ribs were visible beneath her fur, despite her swollen belly. "They must be hungry," he said. He stood up slowly, carefully, so he wouldn't startle them. He entered his freezer, buried under bags of frozen vegetables. He found a package of venison from a
deer he had taken last autumn. He thawed it quickly in the microwave. He was aware of 3 pairs of eyes watching him every move from the living room. Clara stood in the doorway, with Scamp and Shadow peeking around her legs. He put the chunks of meat in a low bowl and set it on the kitchen floor. Clara approached with caution. She sniffed the meat once, then twice. Then she began to eat, quickly but with a strange kind of dignity. When she had eaten her fill, she stepped back. She nudged Scamp and Shadow forward with her nose, allowing them to finish what was left. Over the next few days, a routine formed. The storm had dropped nearly 5 feet of snow. The roads were impassable. Sending the bobcats back into the wild was impossible. Leo kept his distance, but he provided fresh water and 2 meals of venison a day. He noticed that Clara's limp was getting better with the rest. The cubs grew stronger and more playful.
He finally retrieved his camera from his study. He began to document his incredible house guests. He spent hours just watching, his camera resting in his lap. Scamp, the bolder cub, was the explorer. He would wander away from the fireplace, sniffing at the legs of chairs and batting at dust bunnies. Shadow was more cautious, rarely leaving his mother's side. Clara watched them both with endless patience. She would only intervene with a soft chirp if they got too close to Leo, or if Scamp tried to sharpen his tiny claws on the furniture. On the 4th day, Leo was sitting in his chair reading a book. He heard a new sound from Clara. It was a low, distressed growl. He looked up. She was pacing back and forth near the fireplace. Her movements were agitated. The cubs were huddled together, watching their mother with worried eyes. "It's time, isn't it?" Leo said quietly. He had been expecting this. Her pregnancy was very advanced when she arrived. He went to his linen closet and returned with a stack of old, soft blankets. He arranged them in the far corner of the living room, behind his armchair, creating a dark, den-like space. Clara watched him work. When he was finished, she walked over and carefully inspected the makeshift nest. To his relief, she seemed to approve. She stepped into the pile of blankets, turned in a circle 3 times, and settled down. She began to begin softly. Leo picked up his phone. His fingers felt clumsy as he sent a text to Dr. Anya Sharma. She was a wildlife veterinarian he had worked with before. "Got a unique situation here," he typed. "Bobcat mother showed up in the storm, pregnant. She's starting to give birth. In my living room." Anya's reply came back almost instantly. "Leo, are you serious? Keep your distance. Don't interfere unless she's in obvious distress. Keep me updated. I'll come as soon as the plows clear the main road." The birth took several hours. Leo kept his vigil from his armchair. He felt like an anxious father in a waiting room. He just watched, ready to call for help if needed. But Clara handled everything with the perfect ancient instincts of her kind. By nightfall, 3 tiny blind kittens had joined the family. They were impossibly small, each one fitting easily in the palm of a hand. Leo knew better than to even think about touching them. Scamp and Shadow were fascinated by their new siblings. They tried to get close, their noses twitching, until Clara gently but firmly pushed them away. Leo watched, amazed, as she positioned herself. She could nurse the newborns while still keeping a watchful eye on her older cubs and on Leo himself. She was a master of survival. As the days turned to a week, then 2, Leo found himself growing deeply attached to his unusual family. He observed and photographed every milestone. The first time the kittens opened their eyes, revealing tiny chips of blue. Their first wobbly steps. The way Scamp and Shadow learned to be gentle with their smaller, fragile siblings. Anya finally made it to the cabin as soon as the roads were clear. She brought medical supplies and a calm, professional demeanor. "I've worked with wildlife my whole life, Leo," she said, her voice full of wonder. She watched as Clara calmly allowed her to examine the new kittens. "I have never seen anything like this. Bobcats are ghosts. For her to trust you like this, she must have known she had no other choice that night. Will they be okay? Leo asked. It was the question that had been sitting in his heart. Can they go back to the wild? Anya nodded, her eyes serious. They are wild animals, Leo. Clara is doing a perfect job raising them. She's keeping just enough distance from you. But we need to start planning their return. The longer they stay here, the harder it will be for them to adapt. Leo knew she was right. But the thought of the cabin falling silent again made his heart ache. It was a familiar ache, one he hadn't felt so sharply since Clara, his wife, had passed away. He had grown used to the soft sounds of the Bobcat family. He loved the way the cubs would wrestle on the rug in the evenings. He loved the quiet chirp Clara made to call her babies to nurse. Anya helped me plan. Together they designed a large outdoor enclosure that would connect to his house through a small dog door. He installed it in the wall so they could start spending time outside to feel the sun and smell the forest while still having the safety of the cabin. They built it together over a weekend, a large chain-link structure with wooden platforms, climbing logs, and a sheltered corner that mimicked a natural den. The transition began slowly. At first, Clara would only step outside for a moment, leaving her older cubs to watch over the kittens. Then she started taking Scamp and Shadow out with her for short lessons in climbing and stalking. The kittens grew fast. Their blue eyes turned to gold, and their spots became sharp and clear.
Leo documented it all. He created a photographic journal of their lives. He knew the pictures would be valuable to researchers, but for him, they were more than that. They were memories he would hold on to forever. He captured the moment Scamp proudly reached the highest platform in the enclosure, looking like a king. He photographed Shadow, the shy cub, patiently teaching the younger ones how to pounce on a fluttering leaf. He took countless pictures of Clara, her golden eyes filled with a wisdom and love that needed no words. As spring began to melt the last of the snow, Anya helped Leo choose a release site. It was a remote area deep in the national forest with a good water source and plenty of prey. They would take the family there as soon as the kittens were strong enough for the journey. The day came too soon. The morning was crisp and bright. The world smelled of damp earth and new life. Clara seemed to know. She watched intently as Leo and Anya prepared the special transport cages. To their surprise, she made it easy. When Anya placed a piece of meat inside the largest cage, Clara walked in calmly. She led by example. Her cubs followed her lead. The kittens needed a little gentle encouragement, but soon the entire family was ready for the trip. The drive took over an hour, bumping down a rugged Forest Service road. Leo sat in the back of Anya's truck with the cages. He spoke softly to his friends. He told them about his wife, Clara, and how much she would have loved them. He told them he hoped they would have long, happy lives in the wild. He wasn't sure if they understood his words, but Clara watched him with a steady, unblinking gaze that felt like understanding. The release site was perfect. It was a rocky outcrop that overlooked a wide green meadow. A dense forest offered cover on all sides. Anya helped him set the cages down, their doors all facing the forest. "Ready?" she asked. Leo nodded, his throat tight. On her signal, they opened all the cage doors at once. They stepped back to give the animals space. Clara was the first one out. She moved with a liquid grace, a true wild creature. She immediately began to scan the area, her nose twitching, her ears turning, her instincts taking over completely. The cubs tumbled out after her. Scamp, true to form, immediately started exploring a nearby rock. Shadow helped nudge the smaller kittens along. They all gathered around their mother, their small bodies alert, taking in the sights and smells of their new, true home. For a long moment, the Bobcat family stood together at the the edge of the trees. Then Clara did something Leo would never forget. She turned. She looked directly at him. In her eyes, he saw a look that was more than just animal instinct. It was a look of recognition, of connection, of something forged in a storm and sealed with trust. She chirped once. It was the same sound she had made on his doorstep that terrible night. Then she turned and with a flick of her tail, led her family into the deep woods. Leo watched until the last glimpse of Spotted Coat disappeared into the green undergrowth. His chest felt tight, but a smile touched his lips through his tears. Anya put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "They'll be okay, Leo," she said softly. "You did an amazing thing. Not many people would have opened their door that night." "They saved me as much as I saved them," Leo replied quietly. "I had forgotten what it felt like to be needed, to be part of a family." Back at the cabin, the silence was deafening, but it was different now. It was not the hollow, empty silence that had followed his wife's death. This silence was filled with memories. It was filled with the echoes of tiny paws on the floor and soft chirps by the fire. It was a silence of life and trust and love. Leo spent the next few months working with Anya, organizing his photographs and notes into a paper for a wildlife journal. Their story, the story of Clara and her family, could help other animals in the future. Summer painted the mountains in bright greens and bold wildflowers. Leo continued his work, but his eyes were always searching. On quiet evenings, sitting on his porch, he sometimes thought he saw a flash of spotted fur at the edge of the woods. Sometimes he thought he heard a familiar chirping call on the wind. He never knew if it was real or just a memory. What he did know was that his life was forever changed. His cabin walls now told a new story. Next to the eagle and the elk, there were now pictures of Clara, Scamp, Shadow, and the 3 tiny kittens. They were pictures of a family that had found shelter in the most unlikely of places. He kept the small dog door he had installed. He never expected another visitor, but on the coldest nights, when the wind howled through the pines, he made sure to leave it unlocked, just in case. He had learned that the greatest gifts don't come in fancy boxes. They come in unexpected moments, wrapped in fur and trust, with the quiet courage to ask for help. The story of Leo and the Bobcats became a small legend in the mountains. It was a reminder that kindness isn't just for humans. It was a story about how the most important connections can come when you are brave enough to open your door, especially to a stranger in a storm. Leo never saw Clara and her family up close again, but in a way, they never left. They lived in his photographs. They lived in his heart. They were the family that had shown up on his doorstep on a cold winter's night, asking for nothing but a chance and giving him back his life in return.